$1,000 a day to pretend you know the difference between caviar and pâté? Magnolia Winters nearly choked on the reheated coffee she was drinking at the counter of the cafe where she'd worked for 3 years. The woman in front of her, elegant as a magazine page, with platinum hair impeccably styled and a coat that cost more than Maggie's annual rent, repeated the proposal as if she were asking about the weather. "Sorry, What?" Maggie blinked, nervously running her hand over her coffee-stained apron. "Are you talking to me?" Magnolia Winters, 26 years old, literature degree from NYU, worked here for 3 years, lives in apartment 4B on 47th Street with 2 cats named Jane and Elizabeth. The woman smiled, revealing perfectly aligned teeth. "Yes, I'm talking to you." Maggie's heart raced. How the hell did this stranger know where she lived? And why did she know her cats' names? "Look, if this is about some credit card debt, my name is Vivian Blackwell. I work for a specialized human resources company." Vivian slid a golden business card across the counter. "We need someone for temporary work. 1 week, $7,000. Maggie stared at the card, then at the woman, then at the card again. $7,000? To be the personal assistant to one of our clients during a week-long charity event at the Empire State Building. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. Just playing a role." "What kind of role?" Maggie's voice came out higher than normal. Vivian checked a watch that looked like it had come from a Sotheby's auction. "Do you know Cassian Blackthorne?" Maggie almost laughed. "The crazy billionaire who appears on magazine covers for buying entire islands as a hobby? That Cassian Blackthorne?" "That's the one." Vivian smiled enigmatically. "He needs a convincing assistant for a week, someone who makes him seem more accessible, more human." "And why me?" "Because you're authentic, genuine, and mainly because you won't be impressed by him." Vivian leaned over the counter. "He's tired of people who pretend to like him because of his money. He needs someone real." Maggie let out a disbelieving laugh. "Lady, the only real thing about me right now is 3 overdue bills and the fact that I had yesterday's cookies for lunch." "Perfect." Vivian straightened up. "The event starts Monday. You'd have the weekend to prepare, including a personal stylist, spa session, complete briefing on high society protocol." "This is insane." Maggie shook her head, but her fingers nervously played with the golden card. $7,000. It was more money than she'd ever seen together in her entire life. What would be insane is wasting an opportunity like this. Vivian left a thick envelope on the counter. "There are the details. Think carefully, Magnolia. How many times does life offer us a second chance?" Before Maggie could respond, Vivian was already heading to the door, her heels echoing on the cheap linoleum floor. "Wait!" Maggie shouted. "What if I can't do it? What if he finds out I'm a fraud?" Vivian stopped at the door and looked over her shoulder, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. "Darling, everyone's a fraud in high society. The difference is you'll be the only authentic one pretending." And then she was gone, leaving only the subtle scent of expensive perfume and an envelope that weighed like all the possibilities in the world. Maggie stood there for long minutes, looking at the envelope as if it might explode. In the background, the familiar noise of the cafe continued, the whir of the espresso machine, muffled conversations, the clink of dishes, her normal, predictable, safe life. "Maggie!" Her boss's harsh voice brought her back to reality. "Tables don't clean themselves." She stuffed the envelope into her backpack and returned to work, but her mind was far from there. $7,000. Empire State Building. Cassian Blackthorne. That night, in her small apartment, with Jane purring on her lap and Elizabeth sleeping on a pile of books, Maggie finally opened the envelope. Inside was a detailed contract, a $1,000 check as a good faith advance, and a photograph. The photo was of a tall man with dark hair and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something magnetic about him, an intensity that came through even in a simple photograph. "Cassian Blackthorne," she murmured to the cats. "What do you think, girls? Should I embark on this madness?" Elizabeth opened one green eye and closed it again, as if saying, "Obviously yes." Jane just purred louder. Maggie reread the contract 3 times before picking up a pen. Her hand trembled for a moment over the paper. Was she really doing this? Was she actually agreeing to pretend to be the assistant to a billionaire she'd never met? She thought about her empty bank account, the overdue bills, the job that left her exhausted and without prospects. She thought about the nights when she dreamed of adventures she read about in books, of a life that was more than just surviving. "What the hell?" she whispered, and signed her name with firm, decisive handwriting. On Monday, at 8 in the morning, a black limousine would be waiting for her at her building's entrance. In 72 hours, she'd be at the Empire State Building, pretending to be someone she wasn't, alongside the richest man in the city. What could go wrong? Maggie laughed alone in the silent apartment, never imagining she had just signed not only a contract, but the beginning of a story that would change her life forever. Outside, New York gleamed with its millions of lights, as if the entire city was whispering, "Get ready, Magnolia Winters. Your real life is about to begin. Stand straighter, shoulders back. No, not like you're about to march into battle, like you're floating." Maggie stared at herself in the 3-way mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back. Gone were her thrift store jeans and coffee-stained sweaters. In their place stood someone who looked like she belonged in the pages of Vogue, wearing a charcoal gray power suit that probably cost more than her car. "I look like I'm playing dress-up in my mother's closet," she muttered, tugging at the jacket's lapels. "Your mother wishes she had this closet," replied Sterling, the personal stylist Vivian had assigned to her transformation. He was a tall, impossibly thin man with silver hair and an accent that sounded like expensive champagne. "Now walk. Walk. From here to the window. Pretend you're heading to a board meeting where you're about to fire someone's incompetent nephew." Maggie took a tentative step and immediately wobbled in the 4-inch heels. "These shoes are death traps." "Those shoes are Louboutin, darling. They don't kill, they elevate." Sterling circled her like a shark scenting blood. Again. This time, imagine you own the building. For the next hour, Sterling put her through what felt like assistant boot camp. How to hold a tablet like she was born with it in her hands. How to take notes while walking. How to look busy and important, even when doing absolutely nothing. "Remember," he said, adjusting her posture for the 100th time, "you're not Maggie the coffee shop girl anymore. You're Magnolia, personal assistant to one of the most powerful men in America. You anticipate his needs before he knows he has them. You're indispensable. What if he asks me something I don't know? You say, 'I'll handle it immediately, Mr. Blackthorne,' and then you figure it out. Confidence first, competence second." Sterling handed her a leather portfolio. "Inside you'll find everything you need to know about Cassian Blackthorne, his business empire, his schedule, and his quirks." Maggie flipped through the folder. Page after page of information about a man she'd never met, but was supposed to know intimately. He owns 17 companies, has houses on 4 continents, and once bought a restaurant because he liked their breadsticks? That's Mr. Blackthorne for you. Eccentric doesn't begin to cover it. Sterling's expression grew serious. But here's what you really need to know. He's brilliant, demanding, and has absolutely zero patience for incompetence. Also, he paused dramatically. Also what? He's been through 4 assistants this year alone. Maggie's stomach dropped. What happened to them? One quit after he asked her to reschedule a hurricane. Another lasted 3 days before having what she called a creative breakdown. The third one, Sterling shuddered. Let's just say she's in therapy now. And the fourth? She fell in love with him. Sterling's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Poor thing thought she had a chance. He fired her the day she tried to kiss him in the elevator. Maggie sat down heavily in a nearby chair, suddenly feeling like she'd signed up to swim with sharks while wearing a meat suit. Maybe this was a mistake. Nonsense. Sterling knelt beside her chair, his expression softening. You want to know a secret? I've worked with a lot of assistants over the years, and most of them were trying so hard to impress him that they forgot to be human. You're different. How? You're terrified. He smiled. And that means you'll actually listen, actually pay attention. The others thought they had him figured out from day one. You know you don't have a clue, which makes you infinitely more qualified. A knock at the door interrupted them. Vivian entered, looking as polished as ever, carrying a small silver box. How's our Cinderella coming along? She asked, eyeing Maggie's transformation approvingly. She's getting there, Sterling replied, though I'm concerned about the heels. She'll adapt. They always do. Vivian handed Maggie the silver box. A gift from your employer. Open it. Inside was the most beautiful watch Maggie had ever seen. Simple, elegant, with a face that seemed to shimmer like moonlight on water. When she turned it over, she found an engraving. Time is the only true currency. Don't waste mine. CB. Charming, Maggie said dryly. Really sets the tone for a warm, fuzzy working relationship. Vivian laughed. Mr. Blackthorne has a unique sense of humor. He's also testing you. Testing me how? That watch is worth more than most people make in 5 years. He wants to see if you'll be intimidated by his wealth, or if you'll treat it as just another tool to do your job. Maggie strapped the watch onto her wrist, surprised by how perfectly it fit. And what's the right answer? There isn't one. That's what makes it a test. Vivian checked her own watch. The car will pick you up at 7 tomorrow morning. You'll meet Mr. Blackthorne at the Empire State Building at 8 sharp. Whatever you do, don't be late. He once fired an assistant for being 30 seconds behind schedule. You're joking. I never joke about punctuality. Vivian headed for the door, then paused. One more thing, Magnolia. Mr. Blackthorne doesn't know this is all pretend. Maggie's blood ran cold. What do you mean? As far as he's concerned, you're his new assistant, hired through the usual channels. The arrangement we have is between you and me. He has no idea you're being paid to play a role. But it means you have to be convincing enough to fool one of the smartest men in the country. Vivian's smile was sharp as a blade. Sweet dreams, Magnolia. Tomorrow, your real test begins. After they left, Maggie stood alone in the boutique, staring at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked confident, competent, like she belonged in boardrooms and penthouse offices. But underneath all the expensive clothes and professional styling, she was still the same girl who'd been making lattes and worrying about rent just 48 hours ago. She thought about Cassian Blackthorne, somewhere across the city, probably in his penthouse or corner office, expecting to meet his new assistant tomorrow morning. He had no idea he was about to be deceived by a coffee shop employee with a degree in literature and a talent for overthinking everything. What have I gotten myself into? She whispered to her reflection. The woman in the mirror, dressed in designer clothes and wearing a watch worth more than a car, looked back at her with eyes that held equal parts terror and excitement. Tomorrow, at 7 a.m., a limousine would arrive to take her to the Empire State Building. Tomorrow, she would meet Cassian Blackthorne and begin the most elaborate deception of her life. Tonight, she was still Maggie Winters, dreaming of adventures she'd only read about in books. Tomorrow, she would become Magnolia, and God help them both. The Empire State Building at 7:50 in the morning was not what Maggie had expected. She'd imagined crowds of tourists, street vendors, the usual New York chaos. Instead, she found herself in a private elevator with mirrored walls, ascending to floors she didn't even know existed, her reflection multiplying infinitely in every direction. Breathe, she whispered to herself, clutching the leather portfolio like a lifeline. You're Magnolia. You're competent. You absolutely did not spend 20 minutes this morning watching YouTube videos on how to look professional. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors opened to reveal what could only be described as a palace in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Manhattan, while sleek furniture and modern art created an atmosphere that screamed money and power. "You must be Magnolia." She turned toward the voice and nearly forgot how to breathe. Cassian Blackthorne stood in the center of the room, and the photograph in her portfolio had done him absolutely no justice. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her college education, but it was the way he carried himself that made her pulse quicken. Like he owned not just the room, but the entire city below. "Yes, Mr. Blackthorne, You're 7 minutes early." He didn't smile, but something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "I like that." The last assistant showed up exactly on time, which meant she was already behind schedule. "I believe punctuality is respect in action," Maggie heard herself say, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Interesting philosophy." He moved closer, and she caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her think of late nights and bad decisions. "Tell me, Magnolia, what do you know about today's agenda?" Maggie opened her portfolio with what she hoped looked like confident efficiency. The Blackthorne Foundation's annual charity gala planning committee meets at 9. You have a conference call with the Tokyo office at 10:30, lunch with the mayor at noon, and the afternoon is blocked for reviewing acquisition proposals. And? Her heart skipped. And? What am I forgetting? Panic fluttered in her chest. This was exactly what Sterling had warned her about, the test questions, the way he'd probe for weaknesses. She thought frantically through everything she'd read about him, then remembered a small notation in the corner of his calendar. "Your 3 o'clock appointment with Dr. Martinez," she said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. "Your annual physical, which you've been postponing for 6 months. For the first time, Cassian Blackthorne smiled. It was a real smile, not the polished corporate version she'd seen in magazine photos, and it transformed his entire face. Very good. Most people would have missed that. Most people probably don't have to deal with your reputation for avoiding doctors, she replied, then immediately wanted to kick herself. Was she allowed to joke with him? Was that crossing a line? His smile widened. My reputation precedes me, I see. Like a neon sign in Times Square. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and for a moment, the room fell silent. Maggie's career as a fake assistant flashed before her eyes. She'd lasted exactly 4 minutes before insulting her billionaire boss. Then Cassian laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made her stomach do unexpected somersaults. I like you already, Magnolia. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, she admitted. Perfect. Stupidity without courage is useless, and courage without a little stupidity is boring. He moved to his desk, a massive piece of dark wood that looked like it had been carved from a single tree. Tell me, what did you think of my little gift? She glanced down at the watch on her wrist, its face catching the morning light. It's beautiful and subtle, like a very expensive threat. A threat. Don't waste my time. Tends to sound threatening when it's engraved in platinum. It's white gold, actually. Of course it is. She met his gaze steadily. Should I be concerned that you've gone through 4 assistants this year? Should I be concerned that you're interviewing me instead of the other way around? They stared at each other for a moment, and Maggie felt something electric pass between them. A challenge, an understanding, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness. Coffee, Cassian said finally. I need coffee before I can be properly human. Do you know how I take it? Another test. Maggie thought quickly. A man like him would either go for something simple and black, showing his no-nonsense attitude, or something complex that proved his refined tastes. But remembering the detail about him buying a restaurant for their breadsticks, she took a different approach. You strike me as someone who has very specific preferences that probably seem completely arbitrary to everyone else, she said carefully. So I'm going to guess, medium roast, 1 sugar, splash of cream, but only if it's the good cream, not the stuff that comes in packets. And you probably have a favorite mug that you get irrationally annoyed about when someone else uses it. Cassian stared at her for so long that she began to wonder if she'd completely overshot the mark. Then he walked to a cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a navy blue mug with a tiny chip on the handle. Medium roast, 1 sugar, splash of cream, he said quietly. And this mug has been with me for 15 years. How did you? Lucky guess, she lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. No. He set the mug down and studied her face intently. That wasn't luck. You read people. You pay attention to details that matter. The way he was looking at her made her feel exposed, like he could see right through the expensive clothes and professional styling to the girl who'd been making lattes just 3 days ago. For a terrifying moment, she thought he might somehow know the truth about who she really was. I'll get your coffee, she said quickly, grateful for an excuse to escape those penetrating eyes. Magnolia. His voice stopped her at the door. Thank you. For the coffee? I haven't made it yet. For not trying to impress me with how much you already know. The last assistant spent our first meeting reciting my biography like she was giving a book report. She turned back to him, studying his face. Behind all that wealth and power, she caught a glimpse of something unexpected. Loneliness. It was there and gone in a flash, but she'd seen it. Everyone already knows your biography, Mr. Blackthorne, she said softly. What they don't know is how you take your coffee. As she left to find the kitchen, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just passed some invisible test, and that Cassian Blackthorne was far more complicated than any magazine article had ever suggested. Behind her, in the quiet office overlooking Manhattan, Cassian stood at his window and wondered how his new assistant had managed to see straight through him in less than 10 minutes. This was either going to be very interesting or very dangerous, possibly both. The Empire State Agreement, Chapter 4, The Perfect Storm. By noon, Maggie had survived a board meeting where she'd somehow convinced 3 Fortune 500 CEOs that she knew what she was talking about, handled a crisis involving a missing shipment of orchids for the gala. Apparently, white orchids were pedestrian and had to be replaced with rare purple ones, and managed to reschedule Cassian's afternoon meetings when the mayor's lunch ran 2 hours over. She was also pretty sure she was developing an ulcer. You're fidgeting, Cassian observed as they sat in the back of his town car, heading to their next appointment. I'm not fidgeting. I'm strategically repositioning. You've checked your phone 17 times in the past 5 minutes. Maggie looked up from her phone, startled. You were counting? I count everything. It's a habit. He was reading through a contract, but she could tell he was watching her peripherally. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect. Absolutely, completely perfect. Magnolia. Something about the way he said her name made her stomach flutter dangerously. It was authoritative but gentle, like he actually cared about the answer. The catering company for tomorrow's gala just canceled, she admitted. Apparently they've been hit with food poisoning. Half their staff is in the hospital. Cassian's pen stopped moving across the contract. And I have 6 hours to find a replacement caterer for an event feeding 300 of the most influential people in New York City, including 2 senators, a Supreme Court justice, and someone who apparently only eats food that's been blessed by Tibetan monks. Senator Richardson, Cassian said without looking up. Ignore that requirement. He'll eat whatever you put in front of him as long as there's good wine. How do you... Never mind. Maggie shook her head. The point is, every decent caterer in the city is booked solid. I've called 47 companies. The last one laughed at me. 47, Cassian repeated. You called 47 caterers in 2 hours. 48 now. I just texted one while we were talking. Cassian set down his contract and turned to face her fully. In the close confines of the car, she was acutely aware of how he seemed to fill the space, how his cologne mixed with the leather seats and city air coming through the slightly open window. "You've been working for me for exactly 4 hours and 33 minutes, he said slowly. "In that time, you've handled a board meeting that usually requires 3 assistants, resolved the orchid crisis that's been plaguing my event coordinator for weeks, and now you're trying to single-handedly save tomorrow's gala. That's my job, isn't it? Most assistants would have come to me after the 3rd no and asked me to fix it." Maggie bristled. "I'm not most assistants." "No," he said quietly, and something in his voice made her pulse quicken. "You're really not." The car pulled to a stop outside a gleaming office building, but neither of them moved to get out. The partition between them and the driver was up, creating an intimate bubble that felt both safe and dangerous. "I know someone," Cassian said finally. "Someone? A chef. He owes me a favor." He pulled out his phone. "Marco, it's Cassian. I need a miracle." "Yes, tomorrow night. I don't care if you have to clone yourself. Make it happen." He paused, listening, then glanced at Maggie. "Because my assistant believes in miracles, and I'd hate to disappoint her." Maggie's heart did something acrobatic in her chest. The way he was looking at her, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve, made her feel exposed and exhilarated at the same time. "Done," he said, hanging up. "Marco will handle everything. He's the best in the city." "Just like that?" "Just like that." "But what did you have to promise him? What favor does he owe you?" Cassian's smile was mysterious. "I bought his daughter a pony." "You bought a child a pony to secure catering services?" "I bought a child a pony because she was 7 years old and going through chemo, and ponies make everything better. The catering services are a happy coincidence." Maggie stared at him, feeling something shift in her chest. This was not the cold, calculating billionaire the magazines wrote about. This was someone who bought ponies for sick children and remembered exactly how many times his assistant checked her phone. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I beg your pardon." Everyone thinks they know who Cassian Blackthorne is. The ruthless businessman, the corporate shark, the man who bought an island because he was bored. But you're not that person at all, are you? Cassian's expression shuddered, the warmth disappearing from his eyes like clouds covering the sun. "You've known me for less than 5 hours, Magnolia. Don't presume to understand me." The words stung more than they should have. She was supposed to be playing a role, maintaining professional distance. Instead, she'd gotten caught up in the moment, in the way he made her feel like she mattered. "You're right," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I apologize for overstepping. Magnolia? We should go. You have the Peterson meeting in 10 minutes, and you hate being late." She reached for the door handle, but his hand caught her wrist. The touch sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she froze. "I didn't mean to snap at you," he said quietly. You see things that most people miss. It's unsettling. Maybe that's because most people aren't really looking." Their eyes met and held, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with something that had nothing to do with professional boundaries and everything to do with the way he was touching her wrist like he didn't want to let go. "Mr. Blackthorne?" The driver's voice came through the intercom. "We're here." The spell broke. Cassian released her wrist, and Maggie immediately missed the warmth of his touch. "Right," he said, straightening his tie. "The Peterson meeting." They climbed out of the car in silence, but as they walked toward the building entrance, Cassian caught her elbow gently. "Magnolia, thank you for the catering crisis, for everything today." "It's what you pay me for," she replied, but her voice came out softer than intended. "Is it?" He held the door open for her, and as she passed, he murmured, "Because I'm starting to think what I'm paying you for and what you're actually doing are two very different things." As they entered the building, Maggie tried to ignore the way her heart was racing. She was supposed to be pretending to be his assistant for a week, collecting her money, and disappearing back into her normal life. So why did it feel like with every passing hour, the line between pretending and reality was becoming more and more blurred? And why, despite every warning bell going off in her head, did she not want it to stop? The gala was a success. A glittering, champagne-soaked, million-dollar success that had every society columnist scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Maggie stood at the edge of the grand ballroom on the 80th floor, watching New York's elite mingle beneath crystal chandeliers while a string quartet played softly in the corner. She should have been proud, should have been celebrating. Instead, she felt like she was drowning in designer fabric and borrowed jewelry. "You're brooding," came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to find Cassian approaching, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. He'd loosened his bow tie and undone the top button of his tuxedo shirt, somehow managing to look even more devastatingly handsome than he had at the start of the evening. "I don't brood," she said, accepting the champagne. "I contemplate dramatically. There's a difference." "Ah, my mistake." His eyes sparkled with amusement. "And what are you contemplating dramatically? How surreal this all is." She gestured toward the crowd. 3 days ago, I was serving coffee to people who probably spend more on lunch than I make in a month. Now I'm here, wearing a dress that costs more than my rent, pretending to belong. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she immediately wanted to take them back. She was supposed to be Magnolia, competent assistant extraordinaire, not Maggie, the fraud in borrowed clothes. But instead of looking suspicious, Cassian nodded thoughtfully. "Imposter syndrome," he said. "I know it well." "You? You're Cassian Blackthorne. You practically invented belonging in places like this." "Did I?" His smile was sad around the edges. "My father was a janitor, Magnolia. My mother cleaned houses. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens where the heat didn't work half the time." Maggie's breath caught. This wasn't in any of the biographical materials she'd studied. "I had no idea. Most people don't. It's not the kind of origin story that makes for good press." He leaned against the railing beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I spent the first year after I made my fortune convinced that someone was going to figure out I didn't belong, that I was still just Tommy Blackstone from Queens playing dress-up." "Tommy?" The name slipped out as a whisper. "Thomas Cassian Blackstone. I changed it when I incorporated my first company. Thought it sounded more sophisticated." He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Funny how you can change your name, your clothes, your entire life and still feel like that scared kid who doesn't belong." Maggie's heart clenched. Here was this powerful, brilliant man, opening up to her about his deepest insecurities, and she was lying to him with every breath. The champagne in her hand suddenly tasted bitter. "But you do belong," she said quietly. "You built all of this. You earned it." "Did I? Or did I just get very good at pretending?" He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her pulse quicken. "Tell me something real about yourself, Magnolia. Something that isn't in your perfectly crafted resume." The question hit her like a physical blow. Everything about her was a lie. Her qualifications, her experience, even her reason for being there. She opened her mouth to deflect, to give him some safe, manufactured answer. But the words that came out surprised them both. "I wanted to be a writer," she heard herself say. "Still do, actually. I have 6 unfinished novels on my laptop and a drawer full of rejection letters. I tell myself I'm just waiting for the right story, but the truth is, I'm terrified that I'm not good enough. That all those professors who praised my work and all those friends who said I had talent were just being kind. And so you became an assistant instead. And so I became—" She stopped, the lie catching in her throat like broken glass. "I became someone who plays it safe." Cassian reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so gentle and intimate that her breath hitched. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I think that brilliant mind of yours, the one that solved the catering crisis in 2 hours and somehow made Senator Richardson eat vegetables without complaining, that mind doesn't belong behind a desk taking orders. It belongs running the show. His words hit her like a revelation and a condemnation all at once. He believed in her, in a version of her that didn't really exist. The irony was devastating. Cassian, Mr. Blackthorne. A sharp voice cut through the moment like a blade. They turned to see Vivian approaching, resplendent in silver silk, her smile bright and dangerous. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Ms. Blackwell. Cassian straightened, his expression becoming politely professional. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd be able to make it. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Vivian's eyes flicked between them, noting how close they were standing, how Cassian's hand was still hovering near Maggie's face. Your assistant has done remarkable work coordinating this event. Remarkable. Something in her tone made Maggie's blood run cold. There was a warning there, or maybe a threat. She's been exceptional, Cassian agreed, his voice warm with genuine admiration. I don't know how I managed without her. Yes, well, Vivian's smile sharpened. Good help is so hard to find, and so easy to lose. Her eyes locked with Maggie's for a moment that felt like an eternity. I should mingle. Enjoy the rest of your evening. As she glided away, Maggie felt like she'd been doused with ice water. The message was clear. Remember who you really are, remember why you're here, and remember that this fairy tale has an expiration date. Are you all right? Cassian asked, his brow furrowed with concern. You look pale. I'm fine, just tired. It's been a long day. Of course. But he didn't look convinced. Would you like to leave early? I can handle the rest of the evening. No, She stopped, looking at his concerned face, at the way he was studying her like she was the most important thing in the room. The guilt was crushing. Actually, yes, if you don't mind. I have a headache. Let me take you home. That's not necessary. Magnolia. He stepped closer, his voice low and intimate. Let me take you home. The way he said it, like it meant something more than just transportation, made her knees weak. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. 20 minutes later, they were in the back of his town car, the city lights streaming past the windows in ribbons of gold and white. The partition was up again, creating that same dangerous intimacy from earlier. Thank you, Cassian said quietly. For everything today. For this week. He trailed off, searching for words. For making me remember who I used to be, who I wanted to be before I became so focused on who I thought I needed to be. The sincerity in his voice nearly broke her. Cassian, I know this is probably inappropriate, he continued, his eyes never leaving her face. You work for me, and I should maintain professional boundaries. But I can't stop thinking that maybe, when this week is over, when the gala is finished and things settle down, maybe we could what? The words came out as barely a whisper. Could see where this goes, whatever this is between us. The car stopped outside her building, but neither of them moved. The weight of his confession hung between them, beautiful and terrible. I should go, Maggie managed. Should you? She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the billionaire playboy from the magazines, but Tommy from Queens, who was scared he didn't belong, who was taking a chance on someone he thought he could trust, someone who was lying to him about everything. Yes, she whispered, and opened the car door before she could change her mind. Magnolia, he called as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She turned back, her heart breaking with every beat. Sweet dreams, he said softly. As the car pulled away, Maggie stood on the empty street and felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Tomorrow was their last day together. Tomorrow, she would disappear from his life as suddenly as she'd entered it. Tomorrow, she would break both their hearts. Maggie woke up Friday morning with the weight of the world on her chest and Jane purring aggressively in her face. Through her small apartment window, she could see the Empire State Building in the distance, its Art Deco spire piercing the gray morning sky like a beautiful accusation. Her last day. She'd barely slept, replaying every moment from the gala. The way Cassian had looked at her when he talked about his past, the gentle touch when he'd tucked her hair behind her ear, the devastating sincerity in his voice when he'd asked about a future built on a lie so elaborate her phone buzzed. A text from Cassian. "Good morning. How's the headache? Take your time getting in. I moved the morning meeting." Even his consideration felt like a knife to the gut. Maggie typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, "Much better, thank you. See you at 9. But as she stepped out of the shower, she found Vivian sitting at her kitchen table like she owned the place, perfectly dressed in a cream-colored suit and sipping coffee from Maggie's favorite mug. "How did you get in here?" Maggie clutched her towel tighter. "Spare key under the plant. Terribly unsafe, darling." Vivian's smile was razor-sharp. "We need to talk. I'll be ready to leave on schedule. The weekend's tonight, and the weekend's now." Vivian set down the mug with a decisive clink. "I'm pulling you out." Maggie's blood turned to ice. "What? Why?" "Because you've forgotten what this is." Vivian stood, her movements predatory and precise. "This was a business transaction. Play a role, collect your money, disappear. Instead, you're having candlelit conversations and meaningful gazes. You're falling for him. I'm not. Please." Vivian's laugh was cold. "I've been watching you both, the way you look at each other, the way you touch. Last night at the gala, you were practically glowing with it. It's written all over your face." Maggie sank onto her couch, suddenly feeling like she might be sick. "He doesn't know. He thinks you're someone you're not. Yes. And when he finds out the truth, which he will, because men like Cassian Blackthorne always find out the truth, he'll destroy you." Vivian perched on the edge of the coffee table, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you have any idea what he's capable of when he feels betrayed? I've seen him dismantle entire companies over smaller deceptions. But the contract is void as of this morning. You've compromised the mission." Vivian pulled out her phone and showed Maggie a series of photos, her and Cassian in the car at the gala, standing close, looking at each other like they were the only two people in the world. These were taken by 3 different society photographers. By Monday, there'll be speculation in every gossip column about Cassian Blackthorne's new romance. Maggie stared at the photos, her heart breaking with each image. They looked so happy, so right together, so completely doomed. "What do I do?" "You disappear. Today, I'll handle the rest." Vivian stood, smoothing her skirt. "There's a car waiting downstairs. It'll take you to the airport. There's a ticket to Los Angeles. First class, open-ended. Consider it a generous severance package. I can't just disappear without explanation. He'll survive. Men like him always do." Vivian's expression softened slightly. "Magnolia, you're a sweet girl, but you're playing in a league where the stakes will crush you. Take the out I'm offering." After Vivian left, Maggie sat in her towel on her couch for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. Jane and Elizabeth curled around her like furry bookends, sensing her distress. She could do it. She could pack a bag, get in the car, fly to Los Angeles, and start over. She'd have enough money to live comfortably for months, time to figure out her next move. Time to heal from whatever this was before it destroyed her completely. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Cassian's face when he'd told her about being Tommy from Queens. The vulnerability, the trust. The way he'd looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. She couldn't leave him thinking she'd simply abandoned him. Her phone rang. Cassian. "Magnolia? Is everything all right? It's past 10 and I was getting worried." His voice, warm with genuine concern, nearly broke her resolve. I'm not feeling well. I think I need to take the day off." "Of course. Do you need anything? I could send my doctor." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "No, I just..." I need some time. A pause. Is this about last night? Because if I overstepped, if I made you uncomfortable. Cassian, stop. She was crying now, silent tears that felt like admissions of guilt. You didn't do anything wrong. You're perfect. Then what's wrong? Talk to me. I can't. The words barely made it past the lump in her throat. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She hung up before he could respond and immediately turned off her phone. For the next hour, she paced her apartment like a caged animal. Pack and leave, or stay and face the inevitable destruction. Run and preserve the beautiful memory of what they'd had, or stay and watch it crumble when he learned the truth. The answer came in the form of a knock at her door. Through the peephole, she saw Cassian standing in her hallway, looking worried and determined and completely out of place in his expensive suit in her run-down building. Her heart stopped. He'd come for her. Magnolia, I know you're in there, he called through the door. Your neighbors told me you were home. Please, just let me know you're okay. She pressed her back against the door, squeezing her eyes shut. Go away, Cassian. Not until you tell me what's wrong. His voice was muffled but insistent. Did someone hurt you? Are you in some kind of trouble? If only he knew. Please, she whispered. Just go. I can't. The words were so quiet she almost missed them. I can't leave you like this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Together. Together. The word hit her like a physical blow. There was no together for them. There never had been, except in her foolish dreams. You want to know what's wrong? The words tore from her throat before she could stop them. I'm a fraud, Cassian. Everything about me is a lie. Silence from the other side of the door. Then, open the door. No. Magnolia, open the door. Something in his voice, command mixed with pleading, made her turn the deadbolt with shaking hands. He pushed inside immediately, his eyes scanning her face, taking in her tear-stained cheeks and the suitcase she'd been packing in the corner. You're leaving, he said quietly. I have to. Why? She looked at him. This man who'd trusted her, opened up to her, maybe even loved her, and felt the last of her resolve crumble. Because I'm not who you think I am, she whispered. I'm not Magnolia Winter's competent assistant. I'm Maggie, a barista from a coffee shop who was paid to pretend to be your assistant for a week. I don't have any of the qualifications on my resume. I'd never even been in a boardroom before Monday. Everything, all of it, has been a lie. The words hung between them like broken glass. Cassian's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, hurt, and finally, something that looked like devastation. Why? His voice was barely a whisper. Money. I needed the money, and they offered me $7,000 to pretend for 1 week, and I thought it would be easy, just playing a part, but then... She was sobbing now, the words coming out in a rush. But then I met you, and you were nothing like I expected, and I started falling for you, and I knew I was going to break your heart. And I'm so sorry, Cassian. I'm so sorry. He stood frozen for a long moment, and she could see him putting the pieces together. Every conversation, every moment, every connection they'd shared, all of it reframed through the lens of deception. Get out, he said finally, his voice like winter. Cassian, get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. The cold fury in his voice made her flinch. This was the Cassian Blackthorne from the business magazines, the one who dismantled companies and destroyed careers. She'd never seen him before, but she recognized him instantly. Please let me explain. Explain what? How you played me for a fool? How you made me believe? He stopped, his jaw clenching. 7 days. You couldn't even make it 7 days without destroying everything. As he turned to leave, Maggie felt her heart shatter completely. I love you, she called after him, the words desperate and true. He stopped at the door but didn't turn around. No, you don't. You can't love someone you've never met. And I never met you, did I? The real you. The door slammed behind him with a finality that echoed through her empty apartment like the end of the world. Maggie collapsed on her couch, surrounded by the wreckage of the most beautiful week of her life, and cried until she had nothing left. The coffee shop looked exactly the same. Same stained linoleum floors, same mismatched chairs, same ancient espresso machine that sounded like it was dying every time someone ordered a latte. Maggie stood behind the familiar counter, going through the motions of her old life like a ghost haunting her former self. "One vanilla latte, extra foam," she called out, sliding the cup across the counter without looking up. "Keep the change," said a voice that made her blood freeze. She looked up to find Sterling standing at her counter, impeccably dressed as always, but with an expression she'd never seen before, something between sympathy and determination. "Hello, darling," he said quietly. "We need to talk." "If Vivian sent you..." "Vivian's in London, frantically trying to convince her investors that her company isn't falling apart." Sterling leaned against the counter, lowering his voice. "Which it is, by the way. Spectacularly." Despite everything, Maggie felt a flicker of interest. "What do you mean?" "It seems our dear Vivian made a rather significant miscalculation. The Blackthorn Foundation Gala raised $12 million, a record. But more importantly, it generated unprecedented positive press for both the foundation and Mr. Blackthorn personally. 3 major publications have reached out requesting interviews about his transformation and renewed focus on authentic leadership." Maggie's heart clenched. She'd helped create that success, and now she'd never be part of it again. "The problem," Sterling continued, "is that Vivian's clients hired her to make their executives more relatable, more human. But when they saw what she did for Blackthorn, they wanted the same results. Except what? Except it wasn't her work, was it? It was yours. The real connection, the genuine moments, the way you brought out his authentic self. That wasn't part of any plan. That was just you being you." Tears pricked at Maggie's eyes. "It doesn't matter now. He hates me." "Does he?" Sterling pulled out his phone and showed her a series of news headlines. Blackthorn Industries announces new humanitarian initiative. Billionaire CEO pledges majority of fortune to education reform. The new Cassian Blackthorn, from corporate shark to social conscience. "He's been making changes," Sterling explained. "Big ones, starting with donating $50 million to literacy programs in underserved communities. Ring any bells?" Maggie's breath caught. During their car ride on Tuesday, she'd mentioned dreaming of teaching kids to love reading the way she did. It had been a throwaway comment, but he'd listened. "He remembers everything you said," Sterling continued gently. "Every dream you shared, every passion you revealed. He's turning them into reality." "Stop." Maggie wiped her eyes with her apron. "Please, just stop. It's over. I lied to him. I broke his trust. And now he's moving on with his life. Which is what I should be doing too." "Is it?" Sterling studied her face intently. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who's barely surviving, not someone who's moving on." Before she could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Both she and Sterling turned to see a familiar figure entering, not Cassian, but Marco, the chef from the gala. He spotted them immediately and headed over, his expression grim. "Magnolia?" His Italian accent made her name sound like music. "I hoped I would find you here." "Marco, what are you doing here?" "Looking for the woman who saved my reputation." He glanced around the coffee shop with obvious curiosity. "May I sit?" "There is something you must know." They found a corner table, away from the afternoon crowd. Marco leaned forward, his expression serious. "The gala night, after you left, Mr. Blackthorn pulled me aside. He wanted to know everything about the catering emergency. How you handled it, what you said, how quickly you found solutions." Marco shook his head admiringly. "I told him the truth. In 30 years of business, I have never seen such quick thinking, such grace under pressure." He was probably just being polite. No. Marco's voice was firm. He was not being polite. He was, how you say, investigating. Like he was trying to understand something important about you. Sterling and Marco exchanged a look that made Maggie's pulse quicken. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. "After the gala," Marco continued, "Mr. Blackthorne called me. Not about catering, about you. He wanted to know if you had ever worked events before, if you seemed experienced, if anything about your behavior seemed unusual." Maggie's heart stopped. He knew. Even before I told him, he knew something was wrong. "Perhaps," Marco said gently. "But here's the strange thing. When I told him you seemed new to the business but had natural instincts, he smiled. Not the cold smile from the magazines. A real smile, like he was proud of you." "That's impossible. I had just deceived him." "Had you?" Sterling interrupted. "Think about it, darling. Yes, you lied about your qualifications. But everything else, your intelligence, your compassion, your ability to see him for who he really was, that was all genuine. But I was paid to be there. It was all fake." "Was it?" Marco leaned back in his chair. "Because the woman I watched handle 3 crises in one day, who made sure the flowers were perfect and the food was flawless, who cared so deeply about every detail, that woman was not acting. That woman was being herself." Maggie felt something crack open in her chest, a tiny fissure of hope she'd been trying to keep sealed shut. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "Even if that's true, I still lied. I still hurt him." "Yes, you did," Sterling agreed bluntly. "And he's hurt, badly. But do you know what else he is?" "What?" "Lost without you." Sterling's voice softened. "I have friends who work in that building, darling. They say he's been impossible since you left. Working 20-hour days, snapping at everyone, refusing to eat. Yesterday, he fired his new assistant after 3 hours because she couldn't make his coffee the way you did. He probably doesn't even remember how I made his coffee. Medium roast, 1 sugar, splash of cream. In the navy blue mug with the chip." Marco recited it like a prayer. He told me himself, said it was the first time in years someone had really seen him. The tears were flowing freely now, and Maggie didn't try to stop them. Even if that's true, even if he... It doesn't change anything. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make him trust me again. Sterling reached across the table and took her hand. "Then perhaps it's time to stop trying to be the person you think he wants and start being the person you actually are." "I don't understand. You spent a week pretending to be Magnolia, the perfect assistant, but Cassian didn't fall for Magnolia." His eyes sparkled with something that looked like mischief. "He fell for Maggie, the woman who argued with him about his watch, who saw through his walls, who made him remember what it felt like to be human." Marco nodded enthusiastically. "Sterling is right. The question is not how to make him forgive Magnolia's lies. The question is whether Maggie is brave enough to show him the truth." "What truth?" "That you love him," Sterling said simply. "Not his money, not his power, not his status. Him. Tommy from Queens who still feels like he doesn't belong. The man who buys ponies for sick children and remembers how his assistant takes her coffee." Maggie stared at them both, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. Below was the safe, predictable life she'd always known. Above was the unknown, terrifying and exhilarating and possibly devastating. "What if he won't listen?" she whispered. "Then at least you'll know you tried," Marco replied. "But what if he does?" Sterling squeezed her hand. "Darling, some lies are told to deceive. But some lies are told because the truth feels too big, too scary, too impossible to believe. Maybe it's time to find out which kind yours really were." As Maggie sat in that familiar coffee shop, surrounded by the ordinary life she'd been trying to escape, she felt something shift inside her chest. For 2 weeks, she'd been drowning in guilt and regret. But maybe, it was time to start swimming toward shore. even if she wasn't sure what she'd find when she got there. "How do I do it?" she asked finally. "How do I show him the real me when I'm not even sure who that is anymore?" Sterling smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached all the way to his eyes. "By doing exactly what you did the first time you met him, darling. By being brave enough to tell the truth." The Empire State Building looked different at sunset, softer somehow, its Art Deco lines painted gold against the purple sky. Maggie stood on the sidewalk below, clutching a small package and trying to remember how to breathe. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes, watching people stream in and out of the building, none of them the person she'd come to see. Part of her hoped he wouldn't show up. Part of her hoped he'd already left for the day, gone home to his penthouse where she couldn't follow. The coward's way out. But then she saw him, tall, dark-haired, walking with that confident stride she'd memorized during their week together. He looked tired, she noticed, thinner than before. Sterling had been right about the 20-hour workdays. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he approached the building's entrance. In 30 seconds he'd be inside, lost in the maze of elevators and private floors. It was now or never. "Cassian!" she called out, her voice smaller than intended. He stopped so abruptly that a businessman behind him nearly collided with his back. Slowly he turned, and when his eyes met hers across the busy sidewalk, time seemed to suspend itself. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, taking in her jeans and worn sneakers, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the professional style he was used to. This was Maggie, not Magnolia, raw and real and terrified. "What are you doing here?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the slight hitch that meant he wasn't as unaffected as he wanted to appear. "I brought you something." She held up the small package wrapped in brown paper. "May I?" He glanced around at the crowd of people, pretending not to eavesdrop on their conversation, then gestured toward a small park across the street. They walked in silence, the city noise filling the space between them with honking horns and distant sirens. When they reached a bench overlooking the Hudson River, Cassian sat down, but left careful distance between them. Maggie perched on the other end, the package balanced on her knees like a peace offering. "Marco found me," she said quietly. "And Sterling. They told me about the changes you've been making, the donations, the new programs." "Did they?" His tone was flat, giving nothing away. $50 million for literacy programs. She looked at him sideways. "That's one hell of a coincidence." "Is it?" "You remembered what I said in the car that day about wanting to teach kids to love reading." Her voice broke slightly. "You remembered my stupid dream and turned it into something real." Cassian was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water. "It wasn't stupid," he said finally. "It was the first genuine thing anyone had said to me in months, maybe years." "Cassian, why are you here, Maggie?" The use of her real name hit her like a physical blow. "What do you want from me?" She took a shaky breath and held out the package. "To give you this, and to tell you the truth. The whole truth, this time." He took the package but didn't open it, just held it in his hands like it might explode. "I'm listening." "My name is Magnolia Winters," she began. That part was true. "But everyone calls me Maggie, and I've been a barista at Murphy's Coffee for 3 years, not an executive assistant. I live in a studio apartment with 2 cats named after Jane Austen characters, and I eat cereal for dinner more often than I care to admit." Cassian's expression didn't change, but she thought she saw something soften around his eyes. "I have a literature degree that I've never used because I was too scared to try. I write terrible poetry and even worse short stories, and I've been rejected by every magazine and publishing house in New York." She laughed shakily. "I took the job because I needed the money, yes, but also because I needed to prove to myself that I could be someone different, someone braver." "And were you? Different?" Maggie considered the question seriously. "No. I was exactly the same person I'd always been. I just finally had a reason to let her out. Cassian looked down at the package in his hands. What is this? Open it. Inside was a small blue mug, not expensive, not elegant, just a simple ceramic mug with a tiny chip on the handle. Cassian's breath caught. It's mine, Maggie explained. From my apartment. I noticed that first day that your mug had a chip, and I wondered if maybe you kept it because it was imperfect, but still yours. This one's been with me since college. It's the mug I drink coffee from when I'm writing, when I'm thinking, when I'm trying to figure out who I want to be. Why are you giving it to me? Because I want you to have something real from me. Something that isn't part of any lie or any game. She turned to face him fully. And because I love you, Cassian. Not your money, not your power, not the life you could give me. I love that you remember how people take their coffee. I love that you bought a pony for a little girl you'd never met. I love that you changed your name from Tommy but kept the mug with the chip because it reminds you where you came from. Tears were flowing freely now, but she didn't care. I love that you saw something in me that I'd never seen in myself. That you made me brave enough to be the person I'd always wanted to be but was too scared to try. Cassian was very still. The mug cradled in his hands like something precious. I know I lied, she continued. I know I hurt you, and I know you have every right not to trust me. But what we had that week, what we felt, that wasn't fake. At least not for me. I fell in love with Tommy from Queens who was scared he didn't belong. And you fell in love with Maggie from the coffee shop who was scared she wasn't good enough. Maybe that's what love really is. Two people being brave enough to be honest about who they really are. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of traffic and distant music from a street performer. Maggie felt her heart breaking all over again, as the seconds ticked by without a response. Finally, Cassian spoke. You know what the worst part was? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. It wasn't that you lied about your qualifications. It wasn't even that you were paid to be there. He looked at her with eyes full of pain, and something else she couldn't identify. It was that you made me believe I could be loved for who I really am. And then you took it away. But you can be, she whispered. You are. Am I? His smile was sad. Because the woman who loved me doesn't exist, does she? Magnolia, the perfect assistant, was just a role you were playing. No. Maggie reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. You're wrong. Magnolia might have been the role, but the woman who loved you, loves you, is sitting right here. She's messy and imperfect and scared of almost everything, but she's real, and she loves you so much it terrifies her. Cassian stared down at their joined hands, his thumb unconsciously stroking over her knuckles. I don't know how to trust this, how to trust you. Then don't. Not yet. Maggie squeezed his fingers. But maybe you could trust this. I quit my job at the coffee shop. I'm using the money from that week to take a writing course, and I've submitted 3 short stories to literary magazines. They'll probably all get rejected, but I'm going to keep trying anyway. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked me once what I really wanted, and I was too scared to answer honestly. I want to write. I want to create stories that matter, that touch people the way books touched me. And I want to do it not because it's safe or practical, but because you made me believe I was brave enough to try. Cassian was quiet for a long time, turning the chipped mug over in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft, she had to lean closer to hear him. I've been drinking coffee out of paper cups for 2 weeks. I know. Marco told me. I kept waiting for someone to notice, to ask why I wasn't using my regular mug. He looked up at her. No one did. Because no one else pays attention the way I do, the way you do. Why should I believe you won't leave again? That this isn't just another performance? Maggie's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. Because I'm not going anywhere. I'm done running from who I am, done pretending to be someone else. This is me, Cassian. Scared, imperfect, hopelessly in love with you, me. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend however long it takes proving that to you." He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant he made his decision. The walls he'd built around his heart didn't crumble. They simply opened, like doors he'd been too afraid to unlock. "I love you too," he said quietly. "God help me, I never stopped." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and beginning an adventure all at the same time. It tasted like second chances and true love and all the beautiful, terrifying possibilities that lay ahead. When they finally broke apart, Maggie rested her forehead against his and whispered, "So what happens now?" Cassian smiled, the real smile, the one that transformed his entire face. "Now we start over. No lies, no pretending. Just us." "Just us," she agreed. As the sun set behind the Empire State Building, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Maggie Winters and Cassian Blackthorne began the most important collaboration of their lives, building something real together. Epilogue. 1 year later. The coffee shop was packed for a Tuesday afternoon, but then again, it usually was these days. Ever since the New York Times had featured Murphy's Coffee in their Hidden Gems series, the little shop had become something of a destination. Maggie looked up from the manuscript she was editing to find Cassian sliding into the seat across from her, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. One was her old blue mug with the chip. The other was his navy one, equally worn but perfectly loved. "How did the meeting go?" she asked, accepting her coffee gratefully. "Very well. The Literacy Foundation Board approved the new program." He settled back in his chair, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "We'll be able to provide writing workshops in 50 more schools by next semester." "That's wonderful." She reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "The kids are going to love it." "Speaking of writing," Cassian nodded toward her manuscript. "How's the novel coming?" Maggie grinned, unable to contain her excitement. "I just finished the final draft. My agent thinks she can have it to publishers by next week." "I'm so proud of you." The simple words made her heart flutter, just like they had every time he'd said them over the past year. It hadn't been easy, learning to trust each other again, building something real from the ashes of their deception. But they'd done it slowly, honestly, with no more lies between them. Cassian had even met Jane and Elizabeth, who had grudgingly approved of him after he'd installed a cat tree in his penthouse that was taller than most people's apartments. "What's the novel about?" asked a familiar voice. They looked up to find Sterling approaching their table, as impeccably dressed as ever, but with a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there during those first few days. "Love," Maggie said simply. "Lies and truth and second chances." "Ah." Sterling smiled. "Fiction, then?" Cassian laughed. "Definitely fiction. The real story was much messier." "The real story," Maggie corrected, intertwining their fingers, "had a much better ending." As the afternoon sun streamed through the coffee shop windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like possibilities in the air, Maggie reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, she'd been a barista afraid of her own dreams. Now she was a published short story writer, 3 acceptances and counting, living between her own apartment and Cassian's penthouse, watching the man she loved build schools and fund literacy programs, with the same passion he'd once reserved for corporate acquisitions. Sometimes the best love stories began with the biggest lies. Sometimes you had to pretend to be someone else to discover who you really were. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone who loved all your imperfections, including the ones that brought you together in the first place. "What are you thinking about?" Cassian asked softly. "Happy endings," Maggie replied, "and how they're really just the beginning of the best part of the story." Outside, the Empire State Building rose into the afternoon sky, its windows catching the light like a beacon guiding dreamers home. And in a little coffee shop at its base, 2 people who'd found their way to each other through deception and truth, heartbreak and healing, sat drinking coffee from chipped mugs and planning the rest of their lives. It was, Maggie thought, exactly the kind of ending she would have written, if she'd been brave enough to dream it.